Yes, thank you for coming this way. The debt management portfolio may not change much because we've been borrowing and we'll continue to borrow, but about 15 trillion will be spent on debt management. So that is very high. And if our projection in the 2025 budget is not met in terms of revenue, that means we'll need to borrow to augment. So it is neither here nor there.
We're borrowing 13 trillion actually.
13?
Yes, according to their records.
13 trillion, that's 34 trillion revenue, 13 trillion deficit. That's different from what we will spend to concerning out of the budget. You know, we are already owing, and we'll take part of this budget to pay. It's different from the one we will still borrow.
To fund the budget deficit.
Yes.
Yes, that's exactly
Certainly,
my point.
There is a sizable portion of this budget that will be spent servicing the one we are owing. So we are not out of the debt trap. So I have my fears concerning our debt regime.
Okay.
I have my fears.
There's a lot of this conversation. You know, it just started. The president just presented our budget barely less than 24 hours ago. So we'll continue to weigh in and bring experts like you in different sectors and different areas to speak to the issues. Yeah. But we're totally out of time.
All right.
We must thank you, Mr.
I thought you would have had time to look at education and health.
Yes, those are the social components. Those are the social components. That's why I say it's an ongoing conversation. We must thank you for coming, giving us that insight, especially the breaking down of that tax element as far as the new and the old, or the existing and the potential one that is coming. Chukwuemeka is a member of CITN, joining us from our Lagos studio here. Mr. Amali Kwajafa is the DG, Nigeria Textile Manufacturers, joining us via Zoom from Kaduna. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the program. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll take a quick break now. When we come back, we'll get to the very next leg of the conversation. It's going to get exciting right here on the Morning Brief. Join us again.
Welcome back. So it's International Migrants Day 2024, and it's important, you know, to start off a conversation around it, particularly with a view to looking at the role of migrants in global development. But as they say, charity begins at home. So we're going to be looking at that very important subject matter as far as Nigeria is concerned. So joining us this morning to have this conversation, we have Paola Peace, the Interim Chief of Mission, International Organization for Migration, Nigeria. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. We'll also have Mr. Jake Apele, Global Security Rights Advocate and founder TAF Africa. Good morning and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, gentleman and lady, to the program.
Thank you for having me, Bukola.
Yes, sir. So, Mr. Pele, I'm going to start with you because, as we say, charity begins at home, and we know how migration has impacted significantly on Nigeria. Initially, the concern was only around the health sector, but we've seen other, professional practices impacted significantly in Nigeria by migration. And we know that, it's a constitutional right. People cannot be prevented from moving. But you find in many countries of the world, professional associations of Nigerian practitioners who have been commended for contributing significantly to the sectors in those countries. For instance, in America, you find that Association of Nigerian Medical Doctors, in South Africa, the same. How can we harness that force of organization for development back home? Mr. Pele.
Well, thank you, Bukola, for that interesting question. Nigeria and Nigerians who are migrants falls within the global statistics of 3.5% of the world population. And of course, a number of Nigerians also are included in the 9% GDP contribution of migrants globally. Nigerians are successful across the globe, whether it's in America, in Canada, in Italy, where my good friend comes from. We're very vast, talented people and doing some amazing things. There are also, on the flip side, there are also Nigerians who have migrated and maybe they are not able to regularize their paper. Some of them went into other countries through the back door, which is not to be encouraged. However, migrants should be respected. Their human rights should not be violated. I think when that kind of narrative is out there, it will further help to get the best out of migrants instead of demonizing them. And so, straight to your questions, Nigerians everywhere are contributing not only to the economy of the countries where they are, but the economy of the countries of their origin, which is, in this case, which is Nigeria. Of course, you know, there's a huge resources being repatriated back into the country from this population of migrants. And so it is one thing, a good thing for those who are legally in the countries where they are. It's also something to be worried about, those who are illegal, because that should not be encouraged. And as we make progress in this moment and in the discussion, I would be able to give you some more statistics about the contributions of very many Nigerians as we make progress in the course of the program.
Let's take it to Mr. Space on this one. And I would like you to speak to the very thing which Mr. Int'l had highlighted that has to do with respect for migrants. And he's mentioned something quite critical as to what the role of migrants are when they are in those countries. In terms of service, I'm talking about their resourcefulness service and also these remittances. Nigeria is one of those countries where we look at remittances and it's in big numbers, as high as maybe $20 billion sometimes in a year. So it's quite critical for us when it comes to our brothers and sisters who are not here, who are living abroad. But we have also seen that whether part of the global north or a couple of the parts of the global north were always used, when I say we and our migrants generally, who are not resident, who are out there, as political punching bags. Every politician wants to use us as a rhetoric or one thing or the other. So how do we further enshrine respect to tell these guys that, look, yes, some people may do some things that are not in tandem with your laws, but if you look at the positive element, I think this has to be limited or literally stopped, if it's possible.
Thank you for your question. Migrants, like everybody else, have to follow, like they have rights. They are human beings first, so they have rights, but also duties. So it's important to, as my brother Jake was saying, it's important to be informed before departure, upon arrival, get also information from diaspora network as well as from immigration lawyer and so on, in order to be able to really navigate the new environment. Generally, migrants go where diaspora networks are and where opportunities are, be they educational opportunity, work opportunities, and so on and so forth, in various industries, depending on their skill and depending on their hope, but also depending on recognition of their qualification and so on, that sometimes is challenging. And gets people to accept jobs that would not be necessarily the one they've been trained for. So also downscaling and so on are issues that migrants face, as well as the lack of recognition of their diploma, the need to accept sometimes degrading jobs that put them also at stake in terms of their health status, in terms of the opportunity they're looking for. So it's important that migration is well regulated, that people really inform themselves before departure, upon arrival, that they do their research correctly. Because as we were saying, migrants really contribute mostly, we have to admit it, to the country where they live in, and also to a lower extent to the country they come from. But I also like the question we received before. We also know that among those who emigrate from Nigeria, there are health professionals. While Nigeria has a penury, so doesn't have enough health workers, in particular doctors, per capita, which is also a problem because we know that health is wealth, and therefore we need to make sure that we have enough health professionals to cater for our population, in particular in a country like Nigeria with high birth rate. And high mortality rate and high number of outbreaks. So it's critical to keep the link with the diaspora, to build the trust of the diaspora in the country of origin, to be able also to organize regular immigration around schemes such as skill mobility partnership. That's a concept that the International Organization for Migration I work for and the International Labour Organization have developed some years back. So to encourage states to look really on how to harness the benefits of migration, preparing people before departure, having migration schemes that benefit the migrant themselves, country of origin and destination, selecting, for example, if we are talking about health worker, instead of facilitating the immigration of those who are already trained from public university, who will benefit more the country of destination, train people from scratch in paramedical, selecting these people among vulnerable community, for example, internally displaced persons, women, head of household, maybe coming from a conservative society, being already maybe risking to be outside the system, left behind. So you select among those who risk to be outside the system and don't have enough opportunities, and then you train people from scratch to benefit country of destination, but also you keep the link and the possibility for the person to potentially come back, be in place in some teaching hospital. You do the same for highly qualified health professional. So you keep the link between the two health systems and the two countries and the people. So there are various ways, and we also need to encourage regular pathways that don't only target the highly qualified, but all kinds of skilled workers.
All right, Ms. Peace, I'm going to come back to you, but let me bring this also to Mr. Pele. While the rights of migrants, are guaranteed, but there's also that very big concern about irregular migration. And, since 2014, reports are to the effect that perhaps 20,000 migrants who were traveling from Libya to Europe, and you could also count, further down that they're coming from the sub-Saharan African continent as well, have perished at sea. And this speaks to the irregular policies or the inefficiencies of immigration authorities in Europe to save those who are dying at sea. And then how important is it for these conversations also about the push factors, driving these migrants to European countries? How important is it for these conversations to also be had at the international organization levels to reduce this number significantly?
Very interesting question. Both the international or the other countries where migrants are going to and our country have a responsibility to properly educate these individuals who wants to take this risky journey. Of course, how, and we have heard how troubling news that have filtered out from those who drowned in the sea, those who took very difficult terrain to make these trips. And it's something that we have to work collectively, both the country, our own country, take for instance Nigeria, and the country where they're going to. We all need to work together to ensure that there is proper awareness of the risk involved, of the life-threatening decision that these individuals are going to take. Also, it's also important to underscore what in the first place sort of like causes them to make this kind of trip. Economic imbalance, economic inequities. If the country, for instance, Nigeria, if we have basic, the ability to meet the basic needs of people, I don't think they would be willing to embark on such dangerous trips. So both countries have a role to play here. The country where they're going to, the country where they're coming from, they do have a role to play. It's also important to also engage the routes where they are taking. So take, for instance, Libyans. We need to work with the government of Libyans to make sure that we begin to curtail these excesses. We need to work with government of every country where they're going to trail and pass onto this very dangerous journey. We need to work with them. We need to also deal with the cartel, because they are a group of people responsible for this. They are the one that is feeding them with this wrong narrative, giving them the impression that they can make it. They take money from them. They give them the impression that everything will be great. It's also important to note here that there are also our brothers and sisters who lives abroad who wants to bring their family members at all costs. So they will invest anything and everything to ensure that they make this trip. They encourage them sometimes, some of them who did it and, so to speak, they became successful, encourage this kind of practice. So it is something that I'm glad that you're bringing up, and we must not encourage people in any way to embark on trips like this. Now, let's take, for instance, when they do that, sometimes out of ignorance, out of desperation, what do? Do we demonize them? Do we throw them overboard? Do we abandon them? Do we allow them to rot in jails? No. And that's why I'm very, very happy with the work that my friend, Honorable Tijani, who had joined us, is doing at the Federal Commission for Migrants, Refugees, and IDP. Bukola, it's also important to note here, which is of interest to me, that some of these migrants are persons with disability. Some of them also are prey to human traffickers. And there's a need to scale up our awareness. Thank God for channels like yours, and John Momo, who is a dear friend, for giving us opportunity to talk about this kind of things, this kind of issue. So it requires a multifaceted approach to solving issues like this on the part of government, on the part of civil society, on the part of the international community. Everyone are critical stakeholders, and we must work assiduously and collectively to solve this problem once and for all. When people run foul of the law, there are consequences, but we shouldn't demonize them. We should allow them to go through the process and sometimes serve the consequences of their action, but at the same time protect their rights, give them the dignity they deserve. And of course, like I said, there are a number of agencies that have done fantastic work.
All right, Mr. Pele.
In this area. And
that's why it's important to keep the conversation alive. But it's also important for Ms. Peace to respond to this question, particularly with reports about the inefficacy of the response of European countries to help save migrants at sea and have a more robust policy. If it's to return these migrants to their home, it's better to be alive than, to die while trying to cross to greener pastures. I'd like you to respond to this critical subject as well. Ms. Peace now, that's for you.
Like
Ms. Peace, Ms. Peace.
Right, absolutely right.
This is for Ms. Peace now. Ms. Paola Peace, the question is for you.
It's for me.
Peace, Ms. Peace.
Oh, okay.
Peace.
Yes, that's actually is a good question. I hope I hear you correctly, but you want to know how we can prevent that. Actually, is interesting to notice that yesterday was December 18, so we celebrate every year International Migrant Day. Why do we do so? Because in 1990, the international community came together and adopted a human rights treaty on the protections. It's called the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. This treaty covers migrant workers and family members in a regular and irregular situation. The majority of people emigrating regularly, mostly, because irregular migration flows represent between 10–15% of the global flows. So the majority of people do emigrate regularly. They mostly go to neighboring countries. So, for example, from Nigeria, they would go to neighboring countries in ECOWAS. Also, immigrants, the 1,300,000 people living in Nigeria, mostly come from neighboring countries. In Sub-Saharan Africa, in particular, over 90% of migration flows are within Sub-Saharan Africa itself. That's not what we hear, but that's the reality. These are the facts. These are the statistics. Now, we need to prevent such deaths, and that's exactly the reason why countries came together, and the African group at the time, in the 70s, when they started writing this treaty, was particularly vocal. Why? Because what had happened? In the 70s, there was one of these big accidents, now we heard too many of those, of Malian migrant workers who had already a job waiting for them in France, but because their visa, they couldn't obtain the visa, they used criminal networks, smuggling network to get to France. They were hiding in sewing machine inside the truck. The truck driver knew he was not transporting sewing machine, he was transporting human being. So he didn't stop to a police checkpoint before entering the Mont Blanc tunnel. And he speed up the fire burst, and all the individuals, all the Malians, migrant workers inside the truck died. So it was a huge scandal, huge discussion among the international community, and that's why states came together and said, we already have two treaties, one of 1949, one of 1975, dealing with migrant workers from a labor rights perspectives. Why don't we recognize that, first of all, these people are human beings, not only with labor rights, but also other human rights, including the right to work, but not only, also the right to life, and so on and so forth, to dignity, the right to leave any country, the right to return to your country, the right to choose your own residence, procedure and substantial guarantee regarding expulsion, regarding detention, and so on and so forth. Immigration detention should be eliminated. There are alternatives, no custodial measure. So the community came together and they adopted this important treaty. And every year, December 18, is a day to commemorate the incredible contribution that migrants brings to countries.
All right, Madam Pace. Ms. Pace, there's apparently a lot you're trying to say, and I've got the luxury of time we do not have. Let's take it to Mr. Aliyu Tijani Ahmed, who just joined us. He's the Federal Commissioner and CEO of National Commission for Refugees, Migrants, and Internally Displaced Persons. Mr. Ahmed, just one question as we begin to wind down, and that will be building on what has been said by co-panelists of yours that are seated there in Abuja today, and that will be legislation is not in short supply. Implementation is always where the details are always missing. What can we do to effectively implement some of this agreement so that migrants can be respected across board?
Thank you very much. I think the National Commissions for Refugees, Migrants, and Internally Displaced Persons, one of the major cardinal attempts that the Commission has been doing is one, advocacy. Advocacy is key to all the migrants. Let them understand why they should live and how they should live and what they will be doing when they leave. So advocacy is key. Just like what my sister here is saying yesterday, we celebrated the National Day for Migrants. Part of the thing is to advocate, to inform, to make people understand what really they are supposed to do. This issue of people dying through the Mediterranean Sea is all as a result of inefficient information. And again, part of it is the stringent measure that has been put for acquiring visa. All these are issues that are causing people to live illegally out of this country. So what we are trying to do as a commission is to ensure that we provide adequate advocacy. Let them understand why they should leave. Let them also understand the processes they should follow in order to obtain visa and move out of the country. This will reduce this kind of an illegal way of moving, and at the same time also curb the issue of dying through the Mediterranean Sea. Of course, just like my friend has mentioned earlier, there are people who are criminals who tend to lure this Nigerian youth into providing them means and ways of taking them out of the country. As most of these means that are using are illegal means. Therefore, the only way that we should do is through advocacy. Inform our youth that nobody is asking you not to leave this country. Nobody is saying that you should not leave the country, because migration is constant. People must move. But while they want to move, they must move in a legal way, so that all this kind of embarrassment that they are facing outside the country, it should be that kind of thing should have been also taken care of. But, you know, people being where they are, and no matter what you do, you still have this kind of people still parading around. But the National Commissions for Refugees is making all effort. Like just recently, we have reviewed our migration policy so that we make it clear and simple for individuals to understand. And not only that, we are also going to take over the leadership of Rabat process, which is another thematic area of migration. And it is our intention during that time, when Nigeria becomes the head of the migration, head of Rabat process, we'll try to also discuss means and ways that getting visa by individuals Nigerian. Let's see the condition, how it can be softened, so that our Nigerians, not only Nigerians, but even worldwide, will have a soft landing means of getting visa easily, so that it will curb this kind of illegal means of migration.
Indeed, a multifaceted issue. If you look at, the socioeconomic factors at home, which are the underlying things that, inform desperation of Nigerians and indeed other Africans that travel very dangerous routes, just to seek greener pastures. And it would have been a good time, sir, to also talk to you about the state of internally displaced persons and the need for a resettlement plan for them. Talk about Benue, Borno, but we'll definitely have you back on the program as we're out of time on this particular subject matter. We've been talking with Mr. Aliyu Tijani Ahmed. He's a federal commissioner, CEO, National Commission for Refugees, Migrants, and Internally Displaced Persons. We've also had on this panel Ms. Paola Peace. She's the interim chief of mission, International Organization for Migration, Nigeria. And not forgetting Mr. Jake Epele, who's a global disability rights advocate and founder TAF Africa. Thank you very much, gentlemen and lady, for your time on the program.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And so we'll take a breather now. When we return, It'll be time to talk about some very breathtaking pictures and, of course, having a privilege to talk with the mastermind behind those images. Stay with us, we'll be right back.